Hi guys, I hope you are doing well. I have gathered here some various potted plants and I need to repot, and I was just going to repot them, and they need to be repotted for various and sundry reasons, and I don't know if I'll get to all of them on this video because the videos get too long. But I just thought I would show you what I've got here for fun and tell you why I'm repotting it. Yeah, and just give a little bit of info on that. All right, this Haworthia here, it's etiolating. The light color tells you that. It's been way away from the light and window in a little nook, and it's been happy for a while, but not anymore. It's coming alive. It was dormant for the summer and just happy on the shelf, pretty happy. And it gets really bright light, just not a lot of direct light. But as you can see here, this little baby is going, light, light, give me light, and really etiolating. But aside from that, this guy was a little cutting that, well, it had a couple roots on it. It was a pup, but it just got separated from the mom a bit too soon. I don't remember what happened. And so whenever I'm starting plants without many roots, I love these tiny, tiny terracotta pots. And it just lets me water them a lot without the potting medium holding much moisture. So because it's such a small amount of potting soil that can fit in here, and because this is a porous material in the terracotta, it dries out really, really quickly. And with cuttings, they like a little bit of stimulation. Their roots like a little bit of bath once they start developing roots, but they don't want to sit in a full size. Like if this guy had been in a 4-inch pot, these are 2-inch pots. If this guy had been in a 4-inch pot, this is way too much soil, not necessarily for a plant this size per se, but if it didn't have a good root system, the soil would stay wet far too long. The roots need to occupy most of the pot in order to wick the moisture properly and have the soil dry out before too long, unless you use an exceptionally gritty mix like pure pumice or something like that. But I don't like to do that with Haworthias or some of these other guys because they like a little bit more moisture, and I tend to be an underwaterer. But for cuttings, for little plants like this, underwatering is ideal. These guys are another example. These are a little crassula string of buttons, I think, is what the common name was on these. And they were cuttings that I got, and 4 little stems, I believe. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, 4 little stems they started out with, and it's been about a year now that they've been in this pot. They have been stuck in the side of a window, and if they get watered once a month, they're pretty lucky in this tiny, tiny little pot. However, I had no worry about rotting, and that is what I was wanting to avoid. But now they're getting a little bit bigger, and I would like to put them in a slightly bigger pot where I don't have to feel so bad about neglecting them, and where they can start branching out a little bit more and hopefully sending up some new babies. But generally for succulents, when you repot them, it's not so much because the roots need more room, it's that you need more soil a lot of times. These guys can stay so happy, so extremely crowded, most succulents. And so they really needing a bigger pot for root growth isn't super isn't going to occur really fast, is what I'm trying to say. It takes a while for them to actually need more room for their roots. What can happen is they can run out of nutrients and they can run out of moisture too soon, and then they do need a new pot. But it's not really that the roots are too crowded. It's that we just need a little more soil in order to keep them moist for the amount of time that we want to. I hope that makes sense. So whenever I repot, it's almost always when the plant is needing water too often, and every time I go to water it, it's looking wilty, and so I'm like, okay, I don't have enough soil to keep up with my watering schedule, so to speak. And so I repot so that it stays moist for the appropriate amount of time, if that makes sense, because with as many hundreds of plants as I have, I kind of need a little bit of consistency in the watering. So I just experiment and play with them, and always start small and work your way up. And that's a really, really good tip, is if in doubt, smaller is probably better, because these guys are a lot more likely to send up pups and offshoots. If they are root bound, then not. A lot of succulents will not send up offshoots unless they are root bound. And so being aware of that can be helpful. I'm just thinking I should be repotting while I'm talking. I have two Stapleia here, and the reason I'm repotting these guys isn't so much because they need bigger pots, it's because the clay is drying out too fast. And when I got these guys, they were a bit damaged and their roots were a bit damaged. It's been over a year ago, and I put them in a clay pot because I always start out in clay pots and then go from there. I always start small, and I always start with clay, almost always, unless I'm really, really familiar with the plant. But these guys are a lot more water loving than most, and so they don't like the clay very much. And so they're going to go into, I have another clay pot, one here that I'm going to use, but it's glazed, and so it just holds moisture a lot better. And this smaller one is going to go into that. And I'm going to add a little bit of soil to my mix here. Pardon me for just a second. But yeah, these guys, every time I water them, and I water as often as these guys sit over my kitchen sink, the Stapleias, and I try and give them a drink every few days, and they're always bone dry, which part of that is the mix too. It's a quite heavy, quite pumice heavy mix, but again, when starting plants who have had root systems that have been compromised or had mealybug infestations, etc., which both had happened to this poor guy, then I tend to go with smaller pots and terracotta. Sorry, I had to poke that middle out there. Got a little piece of soil there. And I'm just gonna let some of this roots fall off, or some of the dirt, sorry, to check the roots, because this doesn't look like it has very many roots at all. These guys were, I don't know if this guy may have been a cutting. He's been sitting on top. Yeah. He's needing some more roots. Look at that. Look at how little of a root system this has. However, he's sending out buds all over. One of the reasons for this is he's just been too dry. And so he needs, I had just given him a really good water with the vitamin B1, which this actually isn't that, well, it's pretty pumice heavy, and coconut husk. And he just hasn't been liking the mixture, so I'm adding a little bit of peat in and sand and a little bit of bark in with this mixture that I'm potting him in now, because I'm thinking he might like a little bit more acid, and rather than all the pumice and stuff, because that's a little more familiar to them. So I'm just going to kind of, in a case like this, when you have a plant and there's really not a lot of root system, but you can see the places where you would like, or where roots are trying to come out and where it's in contact with the soil. And I just see a mealybug right here. Oh good, it's dead. This guy I've been taking care of, and I had done a systemic pesticide on him, because I just wasn't willing to lose him to mealybugs, and they just were being persistent. And a lot of it was because he was stressed, because he's always dry, because I'm always letting him dry out too much because I ignore him. But when you have a little place where you know you want the roots to be, making a little bit of a well in your pot can help. And then just gonna set him down like this, and I am bending this shoot around this way because I want it to grow this direction a bit more. And this glazed pot will definitely stay longer, or sorry, stay wet longer. I get focused here and then I don't quite think about what I'm saying as much. And again, I don't want to go too big with a pot because I don't want it to just stay. I'm sorry, I didn't realize this was out of camera shot, you guys. My bad, I'm sorry about that. I'll show you again when I replant the other one, but I don't want it to stay just soaking wet at all, but I do want it to stay a little bit wetter than it was. Alrighty, I'm going to set this guy over here and move to this guy. And for this one, I'm not going to actually step up in size. I am just trying to get a couple pots. Wow, they are glued together here. Alrighty, well, I'm gonna nix that for now. I'm gonna use actually this pot, which is just a very crappy plastic pot that you might buy a plant in at a nursery. Looks like this had some kind of a kalanchoe in it. But I like these little plastic pots because they will just slip into a beautiful little slipcover like this and be nice for me on my windowsill. So I am using this guy. I don't have a lot of nice looking plastic pots. I have mostly terracotta covers or glazed terracotta pots, but I don't want to go too big for this guy. And I wish it was a little bit more shallow, but for now, like I said, since I tend to be an underwater, I think the depth is going to be fine. And I'm going to get this guy out. Well, he's really stuck in there. Alrighty, here we go. And these guys can have a pretty delicate root system, so don't be too shocked if it's not huge. You can see this guy's got really nice white healthy roots, but I am not wanting to disturb him too much, so I am going to not purposefully remove the rest of the dirt. Just leave it intact. Not worried about rot or anything with this guy. He's doing great, other than needing more water because Mom forgets to water half the time. I rarely forget. I just, that stinking pot is just drying out way too fast. But like I said, it's just kind of my thing. I almost always start, if it's a new plant that I'm not super familiar with, I always start with terracotta and work my way to other pots if I decide I want them. Even with conophytum, which they dry out super fast, but in the going into the winter months, I still, if I get new ones, I still start out with terracotta. And some of mine love terracotta. I'm not sure some of the varieties really do fine with it, but others like plastic better. Alrighty, there's that guy, and he's just gonna pop right in there. It's a little bit small, but that's all right. This guy is another one that I have to repot. I love my little wire hanging basket, and he has been in this basket for a year at least. And again, with me being an underwater, it's just not working. This is a little Hadiora, and I love these guys. I have a really large one. This guy was just some cuttings, and there's just not enough, you know, it's covered in moss, and there's a really tiny amount of dirt in here, and it just dries out way too fast. These guys are epiphytes also, and they like a bit more moisture. So I am going to check him out. I'm sorry, I'm just deciding which pot I'm going to give him. So I'm going to have to remove him and plant him in dirt just to give him a chance of a happier, longer life. And then I can put a smaller, another succulent that's smaller and doesn't need quite as much water in this one. I have a few of these wire baskets and they just make me happy. And sometimes these guys are wired in. I didn't plant this in this one. This one I bought this way, yep. This guy is wired in. I don't have to cut all of them. And yes, you should have wire cutters, but I'm not going to get up and go get lines. And it's thin and brittle enough that I'm not too worried. Alrighty, little guy, let's just trying to get my finger in around the root ball and pull it out. Trying not to block everything, but I'm ending up blocking stuff. Sorry, this is just a little bit hard to see. Come on. Got one more piece of wire holding it in there. There we go. Now we're coming out. And if you break any of these off, for these guys, you can just stick them back in and root them. Like a little stem like that. But it looks pretty good as far as just gonna peel the moss off really quick over here. One of the hunks, and then I'll gently. Wow, this looks like it was just cuttings planted in moss. There was no dirt in here. So in pulling all of this moss away, I'm seeing the roots of the plant here. Usually we don't want to plant this kind of moss